Now, looking at the mainstream media, we have been portrayed as a continent in a way that we like there is no life in this continent. The continent is not developing. It is looked at as a continent that only has poverty in it. These are the images shown by the outside world about Africa, and this image must change. It must change in a way that if an image portrays poverty, it doesn't attract investors to come. Africa must have an image that attracts investment, not foreign investment, but investment by Africans themselves. We have so many individuals living in the diaspora, and that is why I always make this call. Africa is the future for investment, but Africans have to take the lead in it. And I'm saying this because if you look at the mainstream media today, we have millions of people living in the streets of America as homeless. They do not want us to see that. They don't want us to see poverty existing in European countries. We've seen how Britain is. We've seen, how Italy is. We've seen how some of these countries are. They have their own issues that they find it difficult to solve among themselves. Just one example. Look at how the Ebola epidemic was portrayed, and Africans were portrayed during this crisis or during this disease outbreak. And what happened when the COVID was killing people in the Western world? These images were not shown. So that is why it's high time for us as Africans to develop media outlets among ourselves. And medias that are not in line with our principles, with our agendas, we have to kick them out of the continent. It's either they be neutral and show the beautiful part of the continent as well, or else they stay in their own countries. That is the fact. But we cannot just be here and being portrayed in a way that, as if there is no life. So they have to be neutral. And if you look at this very book, you will understand how media has a role to play in balancing power at the international level. That is why you see all these so-called superpowers have a media outlet that propagates their own agendas, even though sometimes they are built on, promises that are not even materialistic. So we must be aware of this. And the mainstream media have been the cause of most of the problems in Africa.
So there is this young African boy, man, let me call him man. But there's no harm in calling him boy as well. This young African man from West Africa is really making news on the headlines. You understand? Now, right now, if I talk of Burkina Faso, what comes into your mind first? If I speak Burkina Faso, the person who comes into your mind is a very muscular army general, a person who rarely smiles. And this is Ibrahim Traore. When I speak of Senegal right now, you remember the young Senegalese president, Idi. He has some hard name, but I understand you know him. If I speak of Nigeria, who comes into your mind? Bola Tinubu. Bola Tinubu comes into your mind. You understand? So mentioning a particular country, there's a figure that comes into your mind, and there's a reason for this. It can be you have a good reason why you remember them, or rather you have a bad reason why you remember them. Nigeria might not be the best example of good memories, but Burkina Faso can be a good example of good memories. And so this young boy has been trending online for some time now, and he's really making changes to what we are used to. This young man is making is very promising. You understand? They say somebody, a child from how you know somebody from when they were a child. A parent can tell if a child will be good or bad. Yes, good or bad, by how the child was when they were still a baby growing up. He has the wisdom, he has the wit, He has the power, he has the stamina to bring Africa to the next level, and this is what we need. It's long time that we left those. You really don't have to be old in order for you to be the president of any African nation, because many times we've had problems with these old African leaders. You understand? We need young African leaders who are energetic, young African leaders who are visionary, because listening to such a young man speaking, I myself, I feel that Africa is really not going to be so bad in the future. Because if we can elect such kind of people, indeed, we are headed for the right course. Now, I want us to continue watching this video, and then I'll give you my thoughts by the end of the video, where we will have a deep, critical analysis.
They portray the Western world as if everything there is perfect, brainwashing the youths who doesn't have time to look in depth as to what is happening. And therefore, we have seen Africans dying in the Mediterranean Sea. We have seen Africans dying in refugee camps in Europe. We have seen Africans being sent to prisons. Innocent people treated differently just because they are in different continent or just because of the color of their skin. So all these things are happening because of the mainstream media. So we must be aware of it now. Develop media outlets and build up a network among themselves, and they have the African agenda forward. Then Africa can have a single voice.
A single voice for Africa.
Africa 24 is indeed a great media. I think those are some of the individuals that we really need to empower, and making sure that African invest in media outlets like this, so that they can have the opportunity to extend their channels across the continent and even beyond the continent, to make sure that Africans are informed with the best things happening in the continent as well. But if we don't know what is happening, we find it difficult to embrace it. So media is very important. It is one of those most important instruments that you can use to change a society. Because the first step in realizing a development model or a development agenda is through communication. And communication has to be built in a way that it is persuasive in nature, whereby it can ignite the spirit of participation, the spirit of responsibility in an individual, for them to take up visions as collective in a particular society to make change. Even a foreign language cannot be used by a country to develop.
And you are speaking English right now.
But that is the issue. That is the product of our education system. If I speak my native language, the African, other Africans will not understand it. That is the disconnection that exists. I speak 4 different languages. But if I speak those languages, I can only communicate with people in West Africa.
So are you saying that we can be able to develop with that kind of ethnic diversity, difference in languages? Then what we used to communicate, are we heading back to side language in barter trade back in the days?
No, but I think, you know, we live in a very advanced world, whereby English that we are speaking today is not a traditional language in Africa. It was introduced, programmed with strategies. To some extent, we all adapted. Can't we do the same? Or is there anything that exists as these are the people who knows it all and they do it all, and some individuals don't and they cannot do it? Swahili, for instance, there is a progress in East Africa where so many countries now have adopted it as official language. It is being taught in schools, you know, and that is empowering the young people in believing in a language. Language is very important. A Chinese can become a doctor without being able to speak English and French. And that is not possible for a Nigerian, not possible for even a Rwandan, not even possible for a Gambian. That is the wrong that we are talking about in the education system. So we have to be able to produce individuals with skills, with knowledge, with everything, relying on our realities. And that in the first step in that is changing or designing the curriculum that fits the African purpose, with African languages that can be generalized within the continent, where people try to embrace them bit by bit. But without that, our call can never be realized.
Very true. Do we see some success stories in Africa?
Sure, there are. We just talked about Rwanda, for instance. We have seen what is going on in Mauritius. We have seen other countries like in Kenya. We have seen countries like in South Africa and etc. Even though if you analyze most of them in depth, you come to realize that they also have like few lapses in some of their models and etc. Some of them are still trapped with foreign aid, with debts, loans, from Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF, the World Bank. We've seen recently how Chinese are using their financial, strength to more of recolonize African countries, as a result of the little finance that they're giving us, using paper money in exchange with our valuable resources. But we have these problems, but it doesn't mean that we can't fix it. We can fix it. We just have to look inward. We have to start looking down, because relying on the West has not solved the problem. And Garvey said one thing that was very important. Any leadership that teaches you to rely on another race for survival, that leadership will enslave you.
Osman, we've been reading this great book with you, The Post-Development Reader.
Yeah.
And present something like a mainstream media propaganda. What is about that?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that is the work of Majid and Victoria, which is a very good work in development studies. But basically, if you look at the mainstream media, it operates in a way that way before the publication of this very book, in fact, it has ever been there. And that is the beauty of academic, because they can always look into things that happen in our societies and come up with solution to it. I will recommend every development student to automatically visit this very literature. Now, looking at the mainstream media, we have been portrayed as a continent in a way that there is no life in this continent. The continent is not developing. It is looked at as a continent that only has poverty in it. These are the images shown by the outside world about Africa, and this image must change. It must change in a way that if an image portrays poverty, it doesn't attract investors to come. Africa must have an image that attracts investment, not foreign investment, but investment by Africans themselves. We have so many individuals living in the diaspora, and that is why I always make this call. Africa is the future for investment, but Africans have to take the lead in it. And I'm saying this because if you look at the mainstream media today, we have millions of people living in the streets of America as homeless. They do not want us to see that. They don't want us to see poverty existing in European countries. We've seen how Britain is. We've seen, how Italy is. We've seen how some of these countries are. They have their own issues that they find it difficult to solve among themselves. Just one example. Look at how the Ebola epidemic was portrayed, and Africans were portrayed during this crisis or during this disease outbreak. And what happened when the COVID was killing people in the Western world? These images were not shown. So that is why it's high time for us as Africans to develop media outlets among ourselves. And medias that are not in line with our principles, with our agendas, we have to kick them out of the continent. It's either they be neutral and show the beautiful part of the continent as well, or else they stay in their own countries. That is the fact. But we cannot just be here and being portrayed in a way that, as if there is no life. So they have to be neutral. And if you look at this very book, you will understand how media has a role to play in balancing power at the international level. That is why you see all these so-called superpowers have a media outlet that propagates their own agendas, even though sometimes they are built on, promises that are not even materialistic. So we must be aware of this. And the mainstream media have been the cause of most of the problems in Africa. They portray the Western world as if everything there is perfect, brainwashing the youth who doesn't have time to look in depth as to what is happening. And therefore, we have seen Africans dying in the Mediterranean Sea. We have seen Africans dying in refugee camps in Europe. We have seen Africans being sent to prisons. Innocent people treated differently just because they are in different continent or just because of the color of their skin. So all these things are happening because of the mainstream.
Now, after listening to Osman Toure, after listening to the young African man speaking very, very significant information about the growth and development of Africa, I kind of noticed one thing which is very persistent in truth. Yes, the thing which is persistent in truth is that the Western media really portrays Africa in a negative way. And so we can never underlook the contributions that the Western media, the Western mainstream media has made to the bad image of Africa. He gave an example using the situation of Ebola. Ebola is a disease that I think it was rampant in the Congo and Uganda. It really went away with a lot of people, you understand? And the Western world really portrayed Africa in a negative way during this Ebola pandemic, you understand? But Ebola was just something that was happening in a very small region of Africa. And then he gave out another scale, the scale of COVID. He said that COVID really took away, it really did take away a lot of white people. But the mainstream media was not easy on showing this. They were not frequent on showing this in the same way they were frequent in showing Ebola. It shows the level of hypocrisy, the thing we've always been talking about, you understand? So he's going to the extent of saying, sometimes we need to kick those media out, those media which is representing the bad image of Africa, and we need to bring and support our own African media. The problem I have with this is Africans now. Africans are really quick in dismissing what is theirs and accepting what is foreign. Even if something is made in Africa, and Africa will not trust on that thing, and Africa wants to see made in Europe, made in USA. It's been like we've been colonized for so many times to believe we cannot make our own quality products. I myself, back then, I had the same mindset. I suffered it, and that's why I'm confident in saying we've been brainwashed by the Western media to believe we cannot make things of our own. What if it was an African who was making these things in the United States or in Europe? What if it was an African who was making these things? Africans really have a lot, and they have contributed a lot in the science of manufacturing and in the science of industry. We've really done a lot, you understand? And the best example is always the pyramids. If the European could replicate the pyramids, they would have already. But you can never replicate the pyramids. And now he's talking about the significance of acknowledging Swahili. Not only Swahili, we've seen a map showing Swahili, Isazulu. We have the languages in West Africa. Toure is telling us that, there's this thing when I was a child, still learning. There was this thing called a disc. A disc is whenever you are found speaking of a mother tongue or a native language, you could be given this disc. This disc was a form of punishment. You understand? You are given this disc. It was being said you need to speak only English and only English. You don't need to speak Swahili, and unless it's only the lesson of Swahili, and you don't need to speak any other language apart from English. If you speak any other language, you are given a disc apart from English. Now, the disc, any person who touched the disc would face punishment in the evening assembly, where we would gather before going for home, and those people who touched the disc would be punished, would be caned really hard, and they would be told to mop and sweep those classes and wipe the windows. So we grew up knowing Swahili and our mother tongue is something that we should not touch, we should not cherish. We only should cherish the white language, which is English. You understand? Why is this? Why is this happening? Right now is when I'm coming to discover, no, the school system is also pushing this agenda of the Western media, of the Africanization. The schools, the African schools, yes. Right now, any school in Africa is, some schools have introduced Chinese. They're learning Chinese. Chinese is being taught in African schools. I wonder if Swahili is being taught in Chinese schools. It will come a time our children will not know our African languages. They'll only know English. English is not a traditional African language. No, it's the language of the colonizers. It should be accepted as one of the languages, but not at the expense of dismissing our own languages. These languages that God put upon us, He made us speak these languages. And I don't think God, where He is seated, is watching these things as Africans are being pushed out of the Africanism to adopt Western education, or rather Eastern education, or rather any other thing out of Africa. Swahili and those other languages are languages that Africans should be proud of accepting. They should be taught in schools, and they should be having a lot of emphasis, like the emphasis that Swahili is having in our African schools. That is my thought, and that is how I think it should be. People like Osman Toure is just speaking what really is happening. There is no lies in what he is speaking. He is very real in his words. Is speaking for those people who maybe do not have the privilege of speaking on a camera. Osman Toure is speaking for those people. Osman Toure is speaking for that old woman. Osman Toure is speaking for that individual who is suffering in the village. You understand? People have been made to believe that if you cannot speak English, you can never speak. You are not intelligent. No, you can be very smart, but you cannot speak English. Yes, sometimes the clarity of speech, or rather the eloquence of speech, is not a clarity of thought. Because you can speak English doesn't make you more intelligent than the person who can't speak fluent English. No, we have levels of intelligence. Despite those, everything, this is just a way of brainwashing Africans. He's speaking about language, the main points I saw. Another one was media. The media has really contributed bad images. We don't really have to watch these things. We don't need to force ourselves to watch those Western mainstream media. Osman Toure is saying if they can't present neutral information, it's rather they leave, which is okay. There's no way you bombard people with negative images and leaving the positive. You have to show both sides. There has to be neutrality. If you show bad here, you have to show bad there. Many people are really loving to go to USA, Europe, all that. But they are forgetting that we have slums on those places. YouTubers are the ones exposing these places. YouTubers, people from YouTube, not the mainstream media. YouTube is the one exposing all this. And so if YouTube is showing all this, it tells us what the main media was trying to hide. Now they can hide it no more. They are now pretending that they are also showing it after some other people. A common person like me and you maybe just took their camera, walked through the streets of Bronx and showed those places. You understand? I believe Africans, we should appreciate our Africanism. There's nothing wrong with being an African. And salute to brother Osman Toure for giving such enlightening speech to our young generations that is to come. Yes. So I think I'll end the video here. Kindly do subscribe to the channel. Do subscribe. Give it a thumbs up. If you like my work, give me a thumbs up. I'll so much appreciate. See you in the next one, where we'll have a deep critical analysis on the issues of Africa and Africans. See you in the next video, guys.